Good evening, everyone. It's May 18th. Scott Restaurant's here for today's edition of the Listen and Learn podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Two things in particular I want to discuss today. First is the big news, of course, of a special counsel, Bob Mueller, being announced in the Russia probe. That decision was made by the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, as, of course, Jeff Sessions had recused himself. Bob Mueller, respected guy, been running the FBI from 2001 to 2013 under both Bush and Obama, liked by both sides of the aisle. He's also historically been quite friendly with Comey, so all the Democratic concerns about whether or not this investigation will be done properly should ease, I would say, if they're fair-minded. A couple bigger points on this. One, on principle, I think the decision was unnecessary. You still yet to have any actual evidence that the investigation has not been fully funded, going on without interference. Just last week, under oath, you had Deputy Attorney General, a Deputy FBI Director, and now Interim FBI Director Andrew McCabe, saying they've had no issue with the investigation. So, and historically, you've had special prosecutors who can kind of run awry, go on for a couple of years beyond their original mandate. So you should be hesitant about appointing one. So, on the other token, though, I think politically, just given how much of a furor was building the past couple of days, it's probably a politically necessary move and actually may help the Trump administration get more of its program through Congress. Now, why would I say that? Well, historically, what happens once a special counsel is involved, Congress backs off all of its investigations. They don't want to interfere with a special counsel's investigation at the FBI, be calling the same witnesses, subpoenaing the same documents, and perhaps giving hints to those under investigation what authorities know. So I think you're going to see as Congress hit the big pause button. Intelligence committees will continue to do oversight work, no doubt, but the pace of public hearings will stop. The pace of comments from senators and congressmen will stop. You probably may not even see James Comey testify next week. And I think they're all just going to kind of, at least for the next few months, say, Bob Mueller is in charge. We're going to let the FBI do its work. And as Congress, we don't want to interfere. And what that means is they now have more bandwidth to focus on the real important issues: healthcare, taxes, trade, immigration. So all those hours that would have been spent on Russia can now be redirected to these other efforts. And this Mueller investigation may go on for a couple years before there's any resolution. And Congress is not going to wait around that long and do nothing. So I still think good chance you see big chunks of the agenda done this year. And if anything, this kind of frees up the hand of Congress, because they were sick, just as much as we were sick about listening to this Russia story, they're sick of having to talk about it. And now they can very easily say, and they should say, and the White House should say, when asked about Russia, is there's an FBI investigation ongoing. We're not going to comment on it until the investigation is resolved. Instead, we're focused on issues that the American people are focused on, like taxes, healthcare, etc., and keep pivoting back to the agenda, because you now have a special prosecutor that's taking over the Russia investigation. I also want to point out how increasingly bad James Comey is looking. In our last edition, we talked about the letter that he or someone close to him leaked of, did Trump tell him to lay wouldn't it be nice if the Flynn investigation were to go away? But as we talked about then, there was no evidence at all to suggest that that memo was accurate. There's no one to corroborate that memo. And today what you have is it's been uncovered that 2 weeks ago, under oath, FBI Director James Comey said, quote, "Never in my experience has he been told to end an investigation for political purposes," which would run exactly contrary to this memo. You dovetail that to the fact that the current interim FBI Director Andrew McCabe said that there's been no interference in this investigation, and you really feel like that anonymous memo has little credibility to stand on. You have Comey contradicting himself. And who are we going to believe? A self-serving Comey who, after the fact, is leaking a memo that no one else saw and no one else was privy to? Or a Comey who, under oath, is saying nothing below board has happened here? I think you have to take the Comey under oath. But there are questions he needs to start answering, but he just continues to contradict himself. And it's no wonder that his standing with the American people is as low as it is. So again, the special prosecutor, while I have issues with it on principle, I think from a political perspective, it is necessary, and this should now give Congress free rein to focus exclusively on the pro-growth, pro-business, pro-America first policies that we need and that the public voted for in November. Second story, I just want to highlight something kind of bigger picture, is that this is the college graduation time of year. I was at a college graduation this week, and that's student loans. If you look here on this chart, you can see that student loan debt has gone up to $1.4 trillion, essentially doubling in the past 10 years. And why does this matter? What it does is it slows economic growth because you now have people graduating out of school who immediately start having to make payments. And what does that mean? It means you're deferring your first home purchase because you're essentially already carrying a mortgage without having the house once you graduate college. And it defers all of these key life events. Another big thing that we've talked about in past videos is that the pace of new businesses being created is hitting all-time lows. And I think this is quite correlated to the rise in student loan debt. If you graduate college with $200,000 in debt that you have to immediately start paying back, are you going to go and try and start that new business with a very uncertain future when you have certain debt payments? Or are you going to take that job at the big Fortune 500 company that maybe isn't quite as interesting, if won't create as many jobs as a new business would, but you know you're getting that steady paycheck day one to help meet that steady loan payment? And the problem is you obviously would pick the steady job. And student loans are essentially forcing people not to be entrepreneurs. And it's small businesses that drive 90% of all net job growth. And the student loan burden is just crushing the ability of young people to start new businesses. And a big reason for that is how massively college costs have gone up. And if you look here, you can see that over the past 20 years, education inflation, the cost of an education, has gone up 3 times faster than overall inflation has been, which means college is getting more and more expensive and more out of reach for the average American. A college degree today is 2.6 times as expensive as it was 20 years ago. And with college costs continuing to zoom, people have to borrow more and more, which just makes it harder and harder to start that new business, harder and harder to buy that first house and move on with major life decisions. So a key priority of any of our Washington should be lowering college costs. And frankly, this is an area where both parties have done a terrible job and are not prioritizing it as much as they ought to be. And I think what we have to ask ourselves is, we have schools like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, with tens of billions of dollars in their endowment. They charge people $60,000, and they're considered tax-exempt institutions. Is that right? Can you be not paying any taxes when you're essentially a $30 billion hedge fund with a school attached to it, and you're charging people more than the median income in this country? That's an unsustainable situation. And we need to really have a federal government that asks, from a federal tax perspective, is that right? And if not, either these top schools need to start cutting tuition or lose their tax shield. And if you did see the top schools which could afford to frankly charge all their students nothing because they have such massive endowments, that would put downward pressure on all other colleges in this country to cut costs and cut tuition. And we also need to think of whether or not a federal student loan subsidy program, which we currently have, that lets you borrow just as much if you're an art history major as if you're a chemical engineering major, even though your career earnings are so much lower, is right. Or if that's just, as with all subsidies, artificially inflating the demand and the cost of a good. But we need a serious conversation about how we can cut college costs, because a nonprofit does not act in a way that sees its prices increase by 2.5 times what you're seeing in the private sector. It's immense waste. That's what happens when you have a blind government subsidy and no accountability. So that needs to become an increasing priority of this administration and future administrations, because it's slowing new business creation and therefore slowing the potential growth of this economy. So those are really the 2 big things I wanted to highlight today. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe you'd hit the subscribe button and become alerted every time we post videos in the future. You can also follow us on Facebook at the Listen and Learn Podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Read and Learn. Have a great day everyone, and thank you for listening.